And today we're going to talk about Marionette.js and how we run the project, how it's put together, how it works. So just so I can get a feel for the room, how many of you are aware or have used Marionette? Perfect. And how many are aware of Backbone? Okay, great. So that's pretty much everyone. Excellent. First off, I want to thank Joanne for putting this awesome event together, and Hook and Loop for hosting and giving us awesome food and drinks. Appreciate it. So a little bit about me. I'm a developer at a company in Rhode Island called Mojo Tech. We help startups and large companies sort of build their products, turn their ideas into reality. And a nice side effect of the nature of our work, which is a consultancy, is that I get to work on a lot of projects every year and get to evaluate technologies, tools, and how to put together applications. And not only do I get to choose the technologies, I also have to live with my decisions for an extended amount of time, which is a curse and a blessing sometimes. And that's sort of how I found Marionette, was just on a project. We needed a view layer, and it was in that weird transitional time when we were still doing everything on the server, and Marionette seemed like a good fit for what we wanted to do. Okay, so my introduction to Marionette was in the 1.0.x days, and now we're in 2.2 land. So it was quite a while ago. The code was in a very different spot. Things were still getting figured out. There was no real consensus on patterns. A lot of the books that are out today and blog posts were non-existent. There were a few Stack Overflow posts and some documentation, but nothing that really said how to do things one way or the other. So like when I said, what's the best way to show a view inside another view? There was no answer. And so I wrote something, and it was very wrong, but I wrote it. And I struggled using Marionette quite a bit. So I was coming from, you render something on the server, you send it down to the client, and it just works, and you're good. And now all of a sudden my views knew about each other, and I had the state that was persisted on my client side, and my code was rough. And I struggled learning it, and this whole MVC star paradigm didn't really work out too well for me. So my code was rough, that's all I can say. So like after 9 months, I think I worked, this was in between two projects. I had built 2 applications, and I failed quite spectacularly at certain assets or fixtures of those, and kind of spent many long nights like refactoring, figuring out how to transition in between a 3-state view and like share information between multiple views. And I just decided that I needed to learn how this thing was actually put together. And so for me, the best way that I do that is by fixing something. So I think this was my first commit to Marionette, which is a README fix. So some game-changing stuff here. But this is the first thing. I was like, oh, this link doesn't work. And obviously, someone changed the link and the headline, and GitHub is weird how they format it, and no one updated it here. So I fixed it, and it was merged. I'm like, wow, that's cool. So I kept opening pull requests and looking through some other people's pull requests for fixing some things that I wanted fixed. And I noticed that there was this like weird stagnation in the project. Nothing was getting merged, or very few things were, and no one was really actively working on the project for over a month. And it was frustrating to me because I had committed a lot of time to the project, and I wanted these bugs fixed. And big code bases that I'd done had been written using this tool, and so I decided to reach out to the maintainer, which was Derek Bailey at the time, who created Marionette, and see if I could help. So I sent an email, I was like, hey, maybe you want some help? I can help. And then I looked deeper an hour later and realized they had this dev branch that they were updating daily, and I was like, oh, never mind, I'm stupid. But then he got back to me, and he's like, oh, okay, that'd be cool. I mean, why don't you help out? And he was really nice about it, and it's kind of a leap of faith. He actually wrote a blog post about kind of handing the keys over, and he said, like, some person that I didn't know, just give them access to this project that I've worked on for the last 2.5 years, just like give me full access. So he did. I don't know if I would do the same, but I mean, that's pretty awesome of him. So yeah, so after that, I had permissions on the repo, and my activity for, I think, 5 or 6 months was really just me taking care of issues, kind of fixing small things I would run into, but not like re-architecting how Marionette works. And Marionette, just for those that aren't super familiar with it, it's just a view layer that sits on top of Backbone. Gives you like application objects, lifecycle objects. Just adds a lot of boilerplate code that you would have to write yourself to Backbone, which is nice. But yeah, so like my goal at that point wasn't to change how the library worked, to change huge chunks of code. It was to keep it up to date and make sure nothing was broken, and if someone filed a bug that looked like it was affecting everyone, to fix it. It's very like, it was just me. So I wasn't too ambitious, and I'm also working a full-time job at this moment. So that was what I did. But as I started becoming active on the project, these other people sort of popped up out of nowhere. They started commenting on issues, opening pull requests, giving really good feedback. Like, they'd show up in the IRC chat room a lot. So we worked together, we chatted, and one by one, we sort of grew the team. Andrew Kobe from Australia was the first guy on the left side there. And him and I kind of hung out together for a while. It was like 2 or 3 months, just him and me, plugging away at stuff. And then little by little, more people popped in. Jason here got involved. And it was all pretty much the exact same path. People would open issues, comment on other open issues, comment on pull requests, like be like, oh, this code could be better. And it's like once they made that commitment, or maybe filed a new pull request that like implemented something that was very difficult to do and went through through the whole code review process, we kind of brought them into the fold. It's very informal, not like I called up these people and were like, hey, do you want to give us a lot of time for free to work on this project? And you're not going to make any money from this, but you know, it's going to help other people. No, so it's very organic. And usually everyone was using Marionette at their company or had some vested interest. And their company also had some direct vested interest, or at least ancillary. So I think we're up to 8 or 9 people now, just from one in about a year, which is great. And it's like a good size crew, because sometimes people drop out, they have life stuff, but then they come back, and it works out. But going from just me maintaining the project to a bunch of people kind of had a lot of complexity involved with it. Stuff that I didn't know we would encounter, but when we did, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. We kind of did all this by the seat of our pants in a lot of ways, just figuring out how to run a team. And especially, it's like, you read these blog posts, GitHub's like, how we work with our distributed team, or Pivot Labs, or whatever. They're like, this is how we do it, and it's great. It's like, yeah, you're paying those people. You're sending them a paycheck every single month. Like, that's great. It's a lot different when these people are doing it on their own time and not getting paid. And you have these expectations of people, but then you realize, wait, why do I have expectations of you? You're not getting anything from this. So it definitely shifts the dynamic quite a bit. There's like 4 big pieces of how the project is run and how we deal with each other and running the project. There's communications between all of us and the community, features and issues, features being like, I want Marionette to do this. Issues like, it doesn't work when I press this or do this. Code quality, which is the overall complexity and readability of our code base. And community support, which sort of falls also into the issue bucket and feature bucket, but we have a really active community, and people are writing blog posts and asking us questions every hour, sometimes every minute. And having an open dialogue between them is really important for a healthy open source community. And even with the developers on the team, having this idea of like a community of like core maintainers helps people have a vested interest in the success of the project. So communications is the big one. And this shifted quite a bit from when I started. There was an IRC room, like most open source projects have. They have a little button on their website that says, come join us in chat. And then you click it, and it opens this weird, like, web-based IRC client that you've never seen before, and you make up a random username because you don't care and you just want to ask a question and get it solved. And then it's immediately like, hello, question mark, nobody responds. You paste a huge stack trace and maybe a comment, and you wait for 30 minutes and no one replies, and you leave. That's IRC. At that same time, we were also using Google Chat and Google Hangouts for the core maintainers. We'd have like a Hangout or whatever, just talk on chat, which worked all right for like 1 or 2 people or 3 people. And then we found the best thing that I think has happened to the project as far as communications go, which is Gitter. And I don't know if you guys have heard of this or not. It's this really awesome startup that basically gives you a chat room for every open source project you're on. And it's IRC under the hood, but it has this really awesome integration layer with GitHub. So you sign in, it says, oh, are you signed in with GitHub? Well, give us permissions to read your profile information, and it spits you into the room. And you can join rooms. It has your avatar there, which is linked to your name and your picture. And that's important, that picture, because I can recognize people in the chat room, not off their name, just off of their picture and these pull requests that they open. And people can all of a sudden start forming these relationships with each other based on these pictures. And it's weird, but it's a very visual thing. Not IRC where everyone's exactly the same. Maybe some guy's like yellow or blue because he's channel mod. But everyone is an identifiable entity, which I think is great. And it also gives us private rooms for the permission groups in our repository. So like the core maintainers or whatever have their own channel that we can talk about stuff out of the main band. So this was huge, and like we started it, we had like 20 people, and like we're growing 25 or more people a day now, or like 1,500 members on this site, which is awesome. And a neat caveat is, or a neat side note is, it's actually written in Marionette, the whole program, so it's definitely dog fooding our own thing. So the next big thing is, how do we actually get work done in Marionette? Because again, that goes back to that idea that I'm not paying anyone to do this, nobody's making money off of this. Why do people spend time, like, we leave like very, very intense code review cycles. Like some people have gone through like a month plus of trying to get a pull request in, and they've got them in, but it's just like, why would you put up with this? Like every time you think, oh, I'm done. It's like, oh no, change all of this code. Like that's frustrating stuff when you're working at a company that's paying you and makes you want to just like, go home and not look at a computer. But like on top of open source doing this, it's like, why do I even care about these people? Screw it. So how do we do this? It's tricky. The path that we use is approaching pull requests from a features perspective. And features, you might think of it as, I want my list to be sorted. This was a big one. By default, Backbone collection has a comparator, and you can push elements in it and have your Backbone collection sorted, but our collection view didn't sort this for you by default. Never worked this way. And it was always, I think, that's the issue that was like from the origins of Marionette was like, this is too hard. This will never work for everyone. And so no one ever did it. And it was just an open issue. So we talked about it for a long time. We kind of had some ideas how we were going to do it, and someone did it. But we approached it from the feature perspective of like what problem do we want to solve, and once we agree on the problem that we want to solve, we implement the code. From the point like a PR gets open, we go through the code review cycle, and it's usually like 2 thumbs up from 2 of the maintainers, and then it can be merged. It's simple. But like the important thing to realize is the code is kind of the least important aspect of the feature cycle. It's the idea, and it's what problem does it solve, and who does it help? Does it help people that are using this tool? And because you can sort of tie it, you get people in the issue that are like, oh, I can't wait for this to be implemented, and you get like a bunch of those, and you know you're onto something good. When you get a lot of people that are asking, like, when is this going to be done? So it's like motivating, which I think. I talked about the code review cycle. It's kind of grueling a little bit, but it's important, and it shows in our code base because these are the things that we really push for in every single pull request that we get. Functionality, does it do what we want? Does it actually accomplish what we're hoping to accomplish? Complexity, does this add a and foo or bar and C plus one else if switch? No. That's a big one. That's an extreme example, but like usually when someone adds an if conditional inside our code base, we're like, why do we need this? Is there a better way to do this? Tests. We've had a big push over the last 6 months, I'd say, to rewrite all of our tests and to make them test what they say they're testing. There were a bunch of tests that weren't even testing anything. So every feature has to have tests that cover everything that it does. Cohesiveness. Does it fit within the Marionette code base? Does it actually use the internal helpers that we have? Does it use the internal methods? Does it use underscore methods that we have? jQuery, Backbone, does it hook into these things, and are you not like re-implementing something that already exists? Style. We have a neat trick for our style in our code base, which is huge. So when you guys are writing code, maybe internally or for a client, you open a pull request, maybe the senior dev on it or someone else on the team is like, hey, there should be a space between the function and that bracket there, or we need spaces in between our commas, or your comment's the wrong format, or your array is declared incorrectly. Why don't you fix this? Oh, there's an extra white space there, or this has too many branches of logic in it. And you'll see that a lot on open source repositories. You'll open a pull request, the maintainer will get back and be like, this doesn't match any of our style guidelines, you need to fix this. Or some people will be like aggressive and be like, I opened a pull request that fixes all the style in your entire repository, and it will touch every single line in the code base, rewrite all your variables, change everything. And that's great, people want to do that, but it doesn't help open source projects. So what we do, we have JS Hint actually running as part of our unit tests and integration tests. So if your code doesn't match our style that we've defined, your tests fail. And it gives you a nice little message that says your function was declared improperly, blah, 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 too many spaces or whatever. And by doing this, we have eliminated every single one of those comments. Because when people are writing their code, they run the test failed. They say, why'd they fail? Well, I better fix it because I don't want to open a pull request with failing specs. So this was game changing, I think, for the repository, because there's a lot of comments, a lot of work from the maintainers to look through every single line of code to make sure it matched the consistency. And this just fixed it in an automated manner, which was great. And finally, docs. Features are nothing unless they're documented. They're just hidden APIs. We make sure that everyone writes docs. Easy. So we're going to take a little detour here and talk a little bit about the nitty-gritty of open source and the technical how-to, because for a lot of people, working on open source is intimidating because they're not sure how to fork a repo, make sure you stay in sync with the remote repo, check out someone's pull request, correctly open a pull request. It's tricky and confusing. So here are just like a couple quick tidbits that I've found to save me a lot of time and that nobody really knows about or thinks about. The first one that we do a lot, and as maintainers we have to do, is check out someone's remote pull requests. So they fork your repository, they do some work, they open a pull request backend. You don't have permissions on their repository to like go and push changes or like get it without cloning their repository. Like that's what I used to do. I used to clone their repository and then like go to their branch. Now I'd have all these like weird folders with all these forks. So instead, what this line lets you do on GitHub is you're pulling in all the pull requests as an origin. So you can check out pull requests from other people and run the code. And what I do a lot of times is like people will open a pull request and it's 98% there. I'll just check it out and fix it and then be like, it's good to go, and then just merge it. So as a maintainer, this is something that is huge to keep issues not stale and also keep the project moving. And it also puts you in control, which is always something that's good. The idea of non-master feature development. This is just a snapshot of the Marionette tree right now. I think a lot of people work on branches. That's good. But like for Marionette in particular, we have these long-running branches, like a bug fix branch that's fixing bugs, minor, that's new features that will go out in the next release. But nothing gets merged back into master until we do a release. And what that allows us to do is aggressively rebase, aggressively squash commits, remove commits that we found out were breaking before we actually do a release. And yeah, and also because of Marionette being like basically an API that you extend from, once we merge something into master and someone looks at the GitHub repository, they're like, oh, this looks like it's in there. Why isn't it working? So by waiting to do the merging until we do our release, we're preventing people from being confused about our API, which is great. And interactive rebasing. Just so I can see a show of hands, like how many people have done an interactive rebase here? Okay, that's about what I expected. So this is probably the most powerful aspect of Git. It allows you to change commits after the fact, to rewrite them, to change the order, to squash them. This could be a whole talk on itself, but I would encourage you to look into this, and basically allows you to change commits on the fly and change what they do and reword the commit messages, change the code, combine commits. And when we're merging a lot of code into Marionette, like we have branches that go, and then I might be like, oh, these two commits both are trying to accomplish the exact same thing, and they do it half, so I just combine those into one commit. So definitely look up interactive rebasing. It will make you a better programmer and better at having atomic commits that are accomplishing one thing. So back to code quality. An issue with the size of Marionette. It's a big library. It's not huge, but it's big. And when it was just me, I wasn't able to think at a high-level perspective because I'm more worried about like, oh, so-and-so opened an issue and I need to address it right now. I'm not really worried about the overall code in the repository, like how it's structured, these overarching patterns. It's like architecture. It's difficult to focus on that when you're trying like day-to-day grinding, trying to make everything work. And like, for instance, mile-high perspective would be something that like Jason is working on, which is the Marionette debugger or Marionette inspector. It allows you to dive in, look at code. That's so removed from Marionette, but at the same time so important to it. Working on the website, working on the documentation. These are all things that amount to having a really healthy project, but you need a team of people to focus on this because one person running a project isn't able to like go off and say, I'm working on this for a long time and nobody's going to see me. Or I'm going to work on this feature for a long time. Or I'm going to look at how the tests are structured overall and rewrite all of them and convert from Jasmine to Mocha. Like that's something we did. And it's been huge. It's helped so much, but that took a long time. This is also like something really nice that open source lets you do. These people can be like, I'm interested in this one facet, like making sure Marionette works with underscore versions 1.0 to 1.7. So I'm just going to focus on this and like go into Travis and figure out the build so that it runs with every version and gives us an overall build output. That's huge. But like open source lets us do that, which is great. We also have the ability, well, in GitHub to tag pull requests and tag issues. And this allows us to sort of perform a triage, per se, on all of the issues that we have in our repository. And this is nice because someone that has 3 minutes can hop into these new issues, tag it as like, this is a bug, this is critical, this is unclear, this is a minor fix, this is a major fix, and sort of move on. So it's like a lightweight way for you to add a lot of value and organization to the project, which has helped us a lot because we get a lot of issues for sure. And community support. Chat is pretty much the biggest way that we do this. There's also like Twitter, people will tweet at us, people will write us emails. And I don't think I've ever had anyone call me on the phone. But yeah, it takes a lot of time and it's important. Like there'll be blog posts out there, people will write, they'll have incorrect information sometimes, and we have to write like a response in the comment, or like they'll write a really good blog post and we'll be like, oh, this is awesome, blah, blah, blah. You should join us in the chat room so we can talk about it more. And that's sort of being welcoming to the community to come back in and talk with us. And like one of the core guys, that's how we found him. He wrote a blog post, we brought him in. Now he's like a core maintainer. It's awesome. This is something that goes along with community support, is upgrade support. Marionette follows Semver, which means that you can jump from version 1.0.0 to 1.8.8, which is a year and a half of work, and your code will still work. Which is crazy and awesome. But when we decided to do the 2x release, we were like, uh-oh, we got to make this easy because there's huge, huge applications that are using Marionette. And we don't want to lose them as users or have them on this weird like fork branch, which you see a lot of libraries be like, we're going to maintain the 2.3 branch and start working on 2.4. Like, we're like, no, we just want everyone on the latest. So we did two things. We wrote a Marionette.upgrade document and actually have a repository, and this thing's like 25 pages of detailed reports on every single commit and why we decided to change it, what value it adds. So as a user that's using Marionette, you can read through and understand the motivations behind everything. But if you're like most people that use Marionette and they don't want to spend hours reading that document, Jason actually wrote a really cool Python tool that you can run over your repository, and it upgrades all of your code for you. We actually ran it on the Marionette source code, the 1.8.8 source code, and then ran the 2x unit tests on it, and the test passed. So that was our like ultimate test of this tool. So we've had, I guess it's probably over 100 people now have upgraded apps. I've upgraded like
300 people download it or view the repo a week.
Okay, so 300 people a week view this repository a week. It's huge. And we've had lots of people say like, oh, it's so easy. It took me an hour to upgrade our 10,000 line code base or 20,000 line code base, which is huge. And this, again, is focused back on the community, helping people that chose to invest time and money, essentially, into our project to, it's amazing. It helps so much. So the question that's sort of been in the back of your mind or mine the whole time is why open source? Why do people do this? They aren't getting money. Why are they doing this? And the one-word answer is, or the one-sentence answer is, I would say, is like becoming an expert. A lot of people are like, well, how do I convince my bosses to take time from billable work to work on this stuff that we're giving away for free? How does it make any sense? It's like, it's not money. Open source is about the exchange of knowledge, not really money. So knowledge is the currency of open source, and that sounds high and elegant, but it's not. You can view it as very like narcissistic if you want. You give time writing code. In exchange, these experts give you time, their time, reviewing your code, and you learn. So you are investing in yourself by essentially helping a project that is free. It's not often that you get to work on a project that's filled with really bright people that are all super passionate and super, super knowledgeable in like a domain. And imagine working on a project where this is the domain of every single expert that works on it. So like they have an opinion about every line that you write. They have an opinion about things that you don't even know about. And they show you them, and it's amazing. I've learned crazy amounts by working on Marionette and working with the team. And this is the advantage of open source. It's not like it can be, I'm going to make something really cool and share it with people, but also working with a team of people that knows so much is like such a convincing reason for me of like why to work on open source. And you become an authoritative domain expert on Marionette and Backbone, for instance, with Marionette. So now you are like a go-to person in your state, in your country. You are like one of the most knowledgeable pieces about this technology that people have invested millions and millions of dollars on building their products on top of, which is pretty awesome. And you also, now that you have all this knowledge, you bring these practices back to your repositories at work. So you're sharing the knowledge back into the closed source world. So like, oh, I learned this really cool trick to make our tests run faster, or I learned this cool trick to make sure our code stays consistent. It's like you're adding value back into your company, but at the same time, you're getting to learn so much. So open source work helps you grow, and open source work makes you way better in ways that you can't even imagine. At least for me, that's been the case with working on Marionette and working in the backbone ecosystem. Is I've been exposed to things that I didn't know existed, and I've learned about kind of like odd internals that I just never would have run into, because how often do you have to know about like optimizing a switch statement with like a bunch of if-elses? Like, I never needed to know that, but now I do. So open source is really about the people. You get to work with great people. You get to help people. So like, just want to get building, make stuff, which is awesome. So it's my GitHub, Twitter, if you want to ask me questions or tell me I'm wrong. I appreciate that. But thanks, and questions.
I think you said there are 1,500 people now?
Yeah, 1,500 people in the Gitter chat room.
That's in the chat room. That's like a huge amount of people. So how many of those are actually
Contributing code to the repository?
Yeah.
That's a good question what that number is. I don't know how many contributors we're actually up to, but I know that we have like, there's over 100 active people, the last number that I saw. There's over 100 active people in the chat room every month. At the time, this was 2-ish years ago, it was pretty raw out there, like view layer stuff. You could use Backbone. That's kind of what people were doing. They were using raw Backbone and implementing their own views. And I was like, oh, and I'd already done that. I'd written some like Backbone apps, and I'd realized that, wow, these are hard to do well. And I saw Marionette, and it fixed a lot of things, and it looked like code that I liked. So it wasn't perfect, but nothing really is. So like I chose to work on it, and I found these issues, and I just fixed them. So I guess it was the best choice at the time. There's always a lot of choices. It just depends what you want to do or what technologies you want to use. But for what I was looking to do, it was the right choice, I think.
Do you think about like the difference between issues? You mentioned that issues and community support overlap. How do you handle them the same? Like you use GitHub issues for both?
Yeah, so issues and community support, they do overlap in that if someone goes into the chat room and says, hey, this isn't working for me, I say file an issue. And well, most times I say file an issue. And, or if they just want to debug it real quick and I know it's something not an issue with the library, I'll just talk to them. So like sometimes people report issues like, hey, when I do this weird thing with regions and show and destroy and show and do this and this and this happens. I'm like, yeah, that's probably an issue. So we just file it. So yeah, they're both. I agree with you. They're both community support and like kind of issue feature development at the same time.